Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. And today we're going to continue on with our retrieve episodes where I talk about the retrieves that I use with specific baits. It's been really well received. I've gotten a ton of feedback and I get a lot of requests for different types of baits. So I figured I would do one on a video topic that I talked about not too long ago, which was some of my favorite smallmouth baits. And I got a lot of kickback on that video because of the 5 baits I mentioned, I did not mention a tube. So I had a lot of people specifically state that I should have talked about a tube on that video because it's one of the best smallmouth baits out there. And at the same time, every time I do a retrieve video, I get a ton of requests to talk about the retrieves and the different ways that I fish a tube. So I figured in today's retrieve video, I would address how to fish a tube. You know, I've got 3 very distinct retrieves. They're really the only retrieves I use when fishing a traditional tube. And what I mean by traditional tube is, a tube is one of the most versatile baits out there. You can fish a tube in almost any way that you want. You can fish it near the surface, you can fish it deep, you can Texas rig it and fish it and pitch it just like you would be pitching any other bait or a jig. So a tube jig is a really very versatile bait, but what I want to talk about are the retrieves that I use when fishing a traditional tube jig like I've got rigged here. An exposed hook where you've got the hook buried inside of the tube. This is a 2.5-inch tube, one of my favorites, an ISG mini intimidator tube, I believe is what it's called. I'll put the link in the description if you guys want it, but this is an absolute killer for Great Lakes smallmouth. It's a bait that's made up here in the Wisconsin region and has been catching smallmouth by the hundreds. So that's what I'm going to use today. So it's a small little tube. I've got inside just an 1/8 ounce jig head for 2 reasons. One is it's shallow out here on the river, but 2, I like to go with a light tube jig head because what that does is it allows the bait to either spiral on the fall or kind of weave back and forth on the fall. And in both instances, no matter what retrieve you're going to use your tube for, I really think the majority of bites will come on the fall. I would say probably roughly half the bites I get are on the fall if you're fishing a flat or someplace where you have fish roaming. If you've got a very specific target that you're dragging the tube through, then your bites are going to come in that deep water target. But the fall is very important anytime you're fishing a tube. That's why I've got in here just a 1/8 ounce. This is actually a half head, a Berkley Fusion 19 half head jig head, so it's kind of that mushroom style jig head, which works great with mini tubes. So that's what we're going to do. Any other time I'm fishing a tube, I'm generally using spinning gear, but you can for sure use bait casting gear. It does not change the retrieves at all. In this case, this is an MHX NSJ 871. It's a 7.3, basically a medium light fast action rod. I love that for tubes, but at the same time, if I'm throwing say a 3/8 or half ounce tube, a full size tube, I'll be throwing it on bait casting gear. But again, the retrieves don't matter that much. So we're gonna head down to the water. I'll show you the retrieves. Before I do that, I do want to recommend that if you're looking to support the channel, please use the Tackle Warehouse affiliate link to purchase your tackle. I put the description or the link in the video description for you. And let's head down to the water, guys. So you can see we've got our little mini intimidator tube, and this is how we fish it. There's 3 real ways to do it, in my opinion. These are by far the best retrieves that I've got. The first is the traditional retrieve, which is very standard. Throw it out, let it go to the bottom, and then you're just gonna do a slight drag. You know, I'm bouncing it on the rocks. The whole key here is you're trying to bounce your bait off the rocks, make it go in and out and around the rocks, and skitter along the bottom just like a crawfish would be doing, because that's really what you're trying to mimic with a tube jig. So I literally am just dragging it. Depending on the depth that I'm fishing, I may have the rod tip down, I may have it up. In this case, I've got more broken rock like you can see here. And if I don't keep my rod tip up, I will for sure bury it in the rock. But if I were fishing, say, just a gravel flat, at that point, that's when I'd throw it out. And I literally would be dragging it with my rod tip down. So that just is a matter of what you're fishing. I really do think that you're much more snag resistant though if you've got your rod tip up. So that's very basic. I would say the majority of anglers fish a tube that way. That's something that they've learned to do, but it's not necessarily always the best thing to do. You know from watching some of my other retrieve videos that I'm all about creating the reaction strike. And there's lots of times when you're fishing a tube, you're in areas where you have fish that are moseying around, they're up moving on a flat, and they just won't bite unless you create that reaction strike. So one of the best ways to do that is to fire your tube out, you let it go to the bottom, and then what I'll do is I'll literally stroke it like I was stroking a jig. So I'm gonna slack line, rip the rod up from about 3 o'clock to noon. I'm trying to make that tube pop way up off the bottom. So it goes to the bottom, I've got slack line, and I'm just gonna go like that. A quick snap of the rod. And what you're doing is you're getting that bait to really lift off the bottom 5 or 6 feet. You're almost basically recreating the initial fall of your cast. And what that's doing, because I'm slacklining it, is it's creating an explosion off the bottom. You know, if you're fishing somewhere that's got some silt or some sand, you'll create the dust cloud because your bait is leaving the bottom so fast. If I do not do that on slack line, you won't get that same explosion off of the bottom. So really what I'm doing is I'm retrieving the bait all the way back to me by creating 5 to 6 foot snaps off the bottom. So the bait is just almost yo-yoing back to me. A really, really effective way to generate strikes for all the species of bass. It's that reaction strike. It's the bass saying, what is that? I got to check it out. And they cannot help themselves. It's a fantastic retrieve and one of my favorite ways to generate strikes on a tube. I will say when you're doing this, you want to determine if they want a fast fall or a slow fall of your bait. In this case, an 1/8 ounce fall or an 1/8 ounce bait is gliding more to the bottom. If they do not want that and you want a fast fall, go to your 1/2 ounce, your 3/8, 1/2 ounce, even 3/4 ounce tubes, and that will create a really fast fall and get those fish that are not responding to a slow fall to bite it. So that's something to keep in mind. So that's the second way that I fish it. The third is if I know that these fish are on a crayfish bite. So let's say there was a recent crayfish hatch, or you're seeing a lot of crayfish moving around, or up here in the North Country, we got lakes that are full of rusty crayfish to the point where, you know, you go into some areas and it looks like the bottom is moving because you have all these crayfish out swimming around. So if I know that they're on a crayfish bite, a tube is a great way to mimic that. But I'll change up my retrieve. So I won't necessarily just drag it on the bottom. What I'm trying to do is create that short burst that a crayfish does. So I let it go to the bottom. I'll reel down and keep it tight so I'm not slack lining snapping, and I give it 2 pops, but they're short pops. And what I'm doing in this case is that bait's moving about 3 feet at a time, but it's going boom, boom, like a crayfish does. If you ever seen a crayfish flex their tail, they flex it, they shoot about 1 foot, they flex it again, they go about another foot. So I give it 2 quick pops, and that bait is staying closer to the bottom because I'm not doing what I would do with a normal stroke where I'm just giving it that big high stroke. I'm really going from like, I'm gonna say 2 o'clock to like 1 o'clock, but it's a double pop, and that double pop is important. It really is a good way to mimic the crayfish. And one key with this too, guys, that I absolutely love that generates additional strikes is in between some of those double pops, let it sit on the bottom for a while. Let those fish either come and eat it because they think they've got it cornered, or let them think that they've got it, you know, they're looking at it, they come up and look at it, and it's sitting there and they kind of lose their interest, but you give it that double pop at that point and the fish will react. So let your bait sit there longer. Don't just, you know, double pop all the way back to the boat, just real fast. Let that bait fall between double pops and sit on the bottom. You know, a lot of times you'll get strikes where that bait's been sitting there for 5 or 10 seconds, and then all of a sudden it's like they just come and eat it because they can't stand it sitting there. But if you're on a lake where those fish are just chowing down on crayfish, the double pop is definitely a way to go because it's more of that skitter motion along the bottom versus where you're getting it to come 6-7 feet off the bottom with a big stroke. So those are the 3 ways I fish it. I honestly, guys, very rarely catch fish on a tube doing any other retrieve just because I've come to find that these are the 3 best retrieves for me. I hope they'll be successful for you guys. If you've got other retrieves you like with a tube, throw it in the comment section so the rest of us can learn from you as well. Otherwise, guys, thanks for watching. I'm gonna get back to catching a few here before the storm rolls in. And I appreciate all of you watching on a regular basis. Take care, stay tuned, another video coming tomorrow.